All right, everybody, we are back. This is Enough to Keep Going, episode 339 for the week of May 26th. Yes, if you have been looking for us, we were not here last week. I apologize. You can bring the blame all on me. I was out sick, so sick, I had no voice last week. Like, there was a day when I couldn't stay awake for more than 90 minutes without falling back asleep and zero energy. And whatever I had, fortunately passed. Glad to be back here with you all to talk about games and the news in the game industry for the week. But boy, I feel like I've missed a bunch. I have sometimes when you're out sick, it can be a great time for catching up on some games because you're forced to sit in one spot. And other times, like this week, I did not even have the mental capacity to dive into something new. So there's a couple games on my playlist that we'll talk about, but we've got lots of news and lots of games to talk about. Joining me tonight to do that is Game Logic. Game Logic, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm glad to be back. Glad to be here. So yeah, so for the last couple of weeks, let's go ahead and dive into our first segment here with the big game of what we've been playing. As I said, as I've been sick, spending a lot of time sitting on a couch, and the Steam Deck has been my friend in terms of snuggling up and using the Steam Deck. And I've been playing some Hades 2. Been playing it for the past couple weeks. Actually, picked it up when it went into early access back at the early part of May, when a couple other things like the Prince of Persia roguelike got delayed from the Evil Empire people. But yeah, it's smooth. It's Hades. I mean, if you've been listening to any game news over the last 3 weeks, people have talked plenty of this. And I guess what I'll say is, as someone who never really finished the original Hades, I am really enjoying this. I find the magic based combat gives a little more range and some little more like area of effect and distance attacks there, but the general setup is relatively the same in terms of making your way through level by level. You've got doors that sometimes you get a choice that may take you to one thing or the other. Buffs, because this is a roguelike, permanent buffs as you head back to your kind of witch camp and things like that. Yeah, it is very Hero Down Under, thanks for being here. You were here even before we started, Hero. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, it is exciting that it is really polished, it is smooth, it is fluid. The animation looks great, the illustrations look great, but I think the combat really feels, I don't know, I feel like it, I guess it makes sense, right? Like, it's more of the same but polished, right? Like, in a good sequel, you're able to take what you learned from the first one. It's the reason Assassin's Creed 2 is what everybody remembers and not the original one, not Altair, but they remember Ezio. Right? Like, there is the benefit of having some polish, and Hades 2 really hits that. So it's, there's a lot there. I have not finished what's all there already, but even from all the reports, what's there now is just as much as what was in Hades. But it does not have a story ending yet that it kind of clips off, which is, at this point, I've still got plenty to play. And it was a great sick day game to use because the runs can be relatively, as I got better, they got a little longer, but they also can be really short depending on kind of how things spin.
Maybe, maybe,
And
maybe while
yeah,
you're
go ahead.
concurrently talking about being sick, maybe let's not talk about the runs
Yeah. No, fortunately, it was not that kind of
because I
sick.
was I
No,
was quite I was quite caught off guard and mistaken. I was like,
they're
wait,
like,
is
wait
he
a
talking
minute.
about the game or is
No, it's a roguelike, so it is the runs there. Oh, perfect. That's some good middle school humor. Thank you, Game Logic. That is excellent. No, 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 no. That was not the kind of sick I was, but it was very much, it was perfect to do that, right? Because I could play a little bit, put it down for a little bit, come right back, play a little bit more. It just I find the fluidity of the combat so, I mean, as we've talked about here on the podcast, or over the course of this year, we've had some really fluid games with the Prince of Persia, with Tales of Zazar or Zau, and there's a lot of fluidity there. There's plenty of roguelikes out there, but they really they nail this, and so I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad to be playing it. And also, in a month where we've had week after week of layoffs and studio news, a big studio news, that I feel very comfortable throwing my money at a smaller dev in order to help support the continuation and finalization of this game. So
Now,
Hades,
when you talk about fluidity in combat, and I haven't played Hades or Hades 2, is there verticality to the game? I mean, does it?
no, you're on a flat plane. I mean, the fluidity is more about kind of zipping in and out amongst the enemies, being able to kind of dash or to do a little bit of, like in some of these, you have an area of control where it can slow an enemy down or bind an enemy to a spot. And so you're able to kind of work the battlefield, work the play field that way in a little bit. So, and then just the attack, the difference of the attacks, the ability to kind of, you're not necessarily chaining things together in like a Devil May Cry way, but you're definitely, you're chaining together your different basic attacks, your different special abilities as they proc, and to be able to kind of use those and group in a group of enemies up together, so you get kind of maximize your damage output. It really ends up. I think the fluidity there is kind of the motion within each level, not necessarily kind of the fluidity of navigating a space because you are on a flat plane, but it's very polished, kind of fast paced action, which also works really well in a roguelike when you know that you're going to be coming back and combing back through these levels again and again. So
Yeah, because what I have seen of it, so what you're saying tracks. I mean, because what I'd seen of it, it reminded me of kind of God's Trigger in terms of its presentation, and so yeah, that top-down, flat kind of 2D surface was kind of what I was thinking it was.
Yeah. Yep. So yes, that's catching me up. But you picked up one of the bigger releases for this week, Sensua Saga Hellblade 2, correct?
Correct. I did not pick it up. I actually re-upped for Game Pass PC for 1 month. Since
So
that's
did
where
you re-up for this game specifically? Because you've been in and out of Game Pass at a variety of different times.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I re-upped for this game. I re-upped to gain access to this game because it was cheaper than paying $50 for it for a game that I wasn't really absolutely certain I was going to be super interested in. So, and we're going to try. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the podcast because we kind of went quickly through intros. I'm going to try and stick with the podcast tonight, but I am giving up energy drinks, so I'm on coconut water tonight. So I may not be on my typical vibe. So, but I'll try and stick with it.
Well, I am right there with you, GameLogic. It's been a week since I've had caffeine. So one of the things about crashing hard in an illness is like you come out of it on the other side and realize, oh, I'm 3 days out without caffeine and I've already fought through the headache aspect. So, yep. So we'll keep things moving tonight.
Yeah. So I got about the business of deciding that I was going to play Hellblade 2 because I was kind of looking for something new to play, and I wanted to play something in the zeitgeist. I considered then, where I would play it, and I decided on PC versus Xbox. Then decided where I would procure it in terms of, Game Pass or Steam, or just straight from, or just buying it from Xbox, and I elected to go the Game Pass route. So I signed up for my 1 month, $10 to give the game a go. If something happens to cross my radar in the next 30 days, which reminds me I need to turn off auto renew, then I'll stick with it. But if this is the only thing, then I'll let it drop after the month. So we should probably start. So 2.5 hours into it. So this is definitely the introduction. and initial impressions. We should also start with reinforcing the dialogue from, I think, well, not last week, but maybe a couple of weeks ago, or at least maybe last week on Basement Radio Arcade Podcast, where I was asked about this game. And Hellblade is not a game logic kind of game. It's not something that I would typically go after. It's really funny that... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Did you play the original?
I did not play the original. And I kind of deliberately didn't want to do so. Once I'd made the decision that I was going to play this one, I deliberately decided I didn't want to do so because I wanted to litmus test all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that's going on about your impressions of the game based on whether or not you've played the first one, which I do not believe should be an incumbent requirement. The attempt to take off the table a critique of a game if you haven't played the previous one or the last iteration of the studio, or when we talk about a studio like Bethesda, when you haven't played like the entire discography of the studio, to me isn't a reasonable ask, because at all times there's the high potential that new people are going to come to your game. They're going to be new gamers entering the market for the first time. And the one thing that I also, in particular, that I've run into with this game is what should not happen is, because we've talked at length on this podcast about our philosophies about training the gamer, training the player. And what you should not lean on is an over expectation that somebody's coming to the game having been trained on how to play your game from the last iteration. And one of the things that I've run into this game, and it's not the only game that's guilty of this, but this game explains literally nothing to you whatsoever. And so it's either entirely based on an expectation that you've played the first one, or it's just, and I don't know if they did this in the first one or not, but I mean, even down to the basics of routing, like they don't tell you that areas where you can traverse through doors or passageways or shimmies are detailed with like a white, like white paint or white coloring. And that's the giveaway that's like the direction that you're supposed to go when you have no map, no objective indicator, nothing that really tells you like where you're supposed to go. And the walkways of the first beach are all basically like a big sand maze, where there's nothing that really tells you where you're supposed to go. There are some audio cues, and maybe my own innate loot orientation as a gamer tells me that sometimes I don't care where audio cues are. I'm always going to, in order to make sure that I 100% search a level, I'm always going to follow my standard search pattern. So when you do that, this game hits one of those big nopes of mine, and The Last of Us Part 2 is also guilty of this, which is areas that look like you should naturally be able to traverse them, but you can't, like arbitrary barriers that are designed to kind of cordon you into one direction or another. It's just something that I'm not a huge fan of. The audio in the game is really pretty good. I had a weird, probably a glitch on my PC. And I was playing this on a Core i7 12700KF system with an RTX 4070 Super and 64 gigabytes of RAM. I experienced, and I was on a wireless headset. I was on my HyperX Cloud 2. So I experienced instances where the audio would just drop, and then turning the headset on and off, off and back on wouldn't reconnect it. I had to pull the dongle and then reinsert it, and then the audio would like temporarily shift to my speaker and then would snap back to my headset. So after that had happened about 2 or 3 times, I just got rid of the wireless headset and went with an analog set of headphones, and everything seemed to work fine then. So I don't know if that was necessarily a game thing or a headset thing. But yeah, I think one of the things is it's a little bit guilty of, it's not the exact same thing as Red Dead Redemption 2, but a little bit guilty of just not explaining anything to you. And then you combine that with 2 of my big dislikes about games. I don't like puzzles, and I don't like not being told about stuff and having to go off to like Google and look up how to do something. And so the puzzles in this game, which are like these weird kind of glyph site alignment puzzles, again, the game doesn't explain that to you. I had to go off and outside the game and figure it out. And then again, it's puzzles I don't like. But I will say, if you skip past that, these puzzles are, I don't know that I would necessarily call them innovative, but they're balanced in a certain way to a certain extent. Like just making them kind of side alignment makes them a little more bearable and not as much of a pain in the neck as something like the rune puzzles in God of War, right? Where in many cases to solve some of those runes, you had to first of all, you had to find the runes on a level in God of War. And we're talking about the 2018 reboot or whatever. You had to find the runes, and then oftentimes the distance between the rooms would make you like sprint to get within range to throw your axe and hit a rune, and then like literally be taking off before the axe even comes back to you to be running towards the other rune so that you're within range of it by the time your axe comes. Like it's not that much of a pain in the neck. But I will say, at least for that couple that I've experienced, the first one was definitely okay. It's in a very small confined area. The second one, like suddenly goes to take place in this pretty wide open space. The third part of which you can't even really tell that you can traverse to get to. So it took me a lengthy amount of time, and there was a 3-part puzzle. And it just makes it, the way it's spread out just makes it so much of a point of irritation and aggravation and feeling like busy work, that it's really kind of insufferable to a certain extent. Combat in the game, I'm enjoying what I've experienced so far. In particular, where I left off, there is an item that you get that it's kind of a joke to me, but like Sensua goes from being like this like Game of Thrones type of combatant to like a Shaolin monk, like when she picks up this item, and combat suddenly goes from being very heavyweight and very kind of in the vein of Game of Thrones to still kind of being like that, but then having this it's basically like a super that you can pull off that makes you move a lot faster and is kind of rewarding in the same way that a Destiny 2 or like a Spider-Man kind of super is. And until you get to that point, that was kind of where I was feeling, right? I was like, this combat is very kind of heavyweight. It's very slow. It makes me feel like I'm watching a Game of Thrones scene, which Game of Thrones has some great combat, but Game of Thrones, that HBO series, did a very good job of not glorifying combat, right? Not making combat come off as like this elegant, graceful thing, right? Making it like brutal and visceral as it would be in ancient times.
Sure, the medieval combat is, yeah. There's a lot of weight to it,
right? And so that's good, but that's not enjoyable for me personally as a gamer. You're not going to find me playing For Honor or Chivalry or what is that, like War and Banner? I think it's whatever there's a big popular, like semi-popular PC multiplayer game that a lot of streamers play. I think maybe that's it. But
Mountain Blade,
yeah. So you're not going to find me playing games like that. Not that I'm saying that they're bad games, but they're just not in my interest area. A big thing that I personally love in video games and combat is fluidity. And that's why I love Spider-Man, and I love the combat in Destiny 2. And that's one of the big things, too, about, again, until you get this item that at least on initial impression, separates those points of combat. And because I was thinking about this before the podcast, and the difference is when you hit those, you're rewarded with kind of some eye candy on screen, some of the animations. And it's a reward, right? You've done a thing, right? And so here, let me show you like this really cool animation. In Hellblade 2, there are some animations, and they are scripted animations. You're not in control of the character, and they're not rewards, right? They're maybe they're punishments. Like it's hard for me to tell. Because in talking to some people who have finished the game, one of the things I asked was, I said, "Hey guys, is it possible to lose a fight in Hellblade 2? Because I haven't really like seen that happen." And they were like, "Yeah, I finished the game and I think I lost like one fight." So these, again, not talking about these item supers, but there are scripted animations that happen in the course of a fight where, an enemy, for instance, an enemy might grab your arm, punch you in the face, choke you for a moment. You may counter them, slip out of the grapple, and punch them back, or in fact, actually like drive a sword through them. Through the entire course of that animation, you're not in control of the character. Like, it's all scripted. Like, that's being demoed, that's being displayed on the screen. So for some people, that's going to be not as rewarding as a fight sequence, a combat sequence where they're in control, and then when that control is taken from them, it's because it's a reward for them having done well. Because
so
all of those,
how does the game set that animation aspect there? Is it like a quick time event where you've got to hit certain buttons, or you try to match something? Like, I've heard people describe the combat similar to how you're describing it being not very engaging, feeling very hands off, almost like a matching puzzle or something in there in terms of that. So I'm trying to figure out how it, short of it being Dragon's Lair, how does it decide what that series of events is going to be?
No, that's a good analog.
Wara in the chat talks about it being QT based.
It's not really, right? Those, and that's almost a point of where you would think that that's negative. For instance, like when those animations that I talked about, like in another game, you will get grabbed and you can feel that it's just like faux immersion, right? But you'll get grabbed and you'll be told, and it doesn't even have to be a quick time event. The control scheme will tell you that, hey, to break grapple, rapidly hit the B button, right? There isn't any of that. There's no way, as far as I know, to break a grapple. Like, if you get grabbed, you just get grabbed, and it goes into that like scripted animation, and whatever happens. So it's not. I mean, as far as I can tell, there aren't any quick time events. I haven't been exposed to any just yet. So it's not even that. It's just, I wouldn't say at random, but at least 2.5 hours in, I haven't like figured out, like, when those things happen, I don't walk away from it going, oh yeah, I fought the person really well, so I was rewarded with this thing. Like, I'm like, no, it just happened, and I had just happened to win that fight. And some of them happen like really quick. Like, some of them are in the first opening sequence, like you will get hit by like a character off screen, right? You will exchange you will do a sword exchange with them, like maybe like once, maybe twice, and then it'll go into that animation, and the fight will be over. And then you'll be presented with like a mini boss or a slightly more aggro like enemy or whatever. So I don't want to make it. I'm not saying that to say that the combat's not enjoyable, because while I'm only saying it to say that the mix, I feel, the subjective feeling that I have about the mix of like degree to which I'm in control versus like when that control is taken from you right now, I feel like it's about 80-20. It's about 20% of the time in combat, right? I feel if you measure like the like battle rhythm of a hand-to-hand engagement as if it's like a few bars of music, right? What I'm saying is I might play 8 of those bars, and then 2 bars, like, that control might be taken from me and goes into an animation. So like I said,
like is it doing that in service of the narrative? Like, those types of encounters are scripted to a degree in order to keep the narrative flowing in the way that it's flowing, right? As you're saying, like, losing battles isn't actually not something you're worried about. Like,
I think where people talk about, and where even the studio talked about, like, the cinematic feel of the game, I feel like that's what it is, right? That it's essentially a it's a Game of Thrones scene or a Braveheart scene, right? of you stepping through combat of meeting multiple enemies like in sequence, and in that sequence like some cool things happen. They look cool on screen, but like I said, they're just not. The difference between it and other games is it doesn't feel to me like they're directly coupled to something you've done well, and they're not part of a reward-based system, and that makes them feel different. If you're into the game for that cinematographic presentation, then you're probably okay with that. I don't necessarily feel good or bad. I feel kind of indifferent about it. I mean, it's basically the way I feel. Like I said, once you get the item, combat to me feels like it jumps like 2 or 3 levels, right? It's the same feeling that I had in Death Stranding, where people would tell you, people who haven't played the game enough, will tell you that there's no combat in Death Stranding. And then when you hit that point where there's actually combat in Death Stranding, you're like, oh, this game actually has combat, and it's kind of like cool. So I think it's just, to me, it just feels like something to kind of be aware of. What I was going to say is it's kind of funny to me that that I made kind of ironic, serendipitous that I posted on Twitter that I was going to download the game and I was going to get it started, and somebody said something to me sort of along the lines of what Warawana said. Again, not saying you used it this way, Warawana, but in the same way, like, I'm not trying to say a snarky comment, but it was like just making like a joke of like, hey, hope you don't have problems staying awake or whatever. And my response to them was, well, it's not a JRPG, so I should be okay. Commenting about the times that I have played JRPGs and haven't really been able to stick with it because it's not, and again, it's something I hit on today. It's not even necessarily because I was bored. The thing that I've realized over the last couple of weeks as I've been putting some thought to this is it's because exposition in a JRPG is so incredibly long.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to somebody who's fallen asleep at Twilight Princess back in the day, right? Because if you can't get me into it after the first 45 minutes, yeah, I'm probably going to start dozing off.
So, and what's funny to me is I said that this game wasn't that, but this game is that. To me, you need to walk into it with the understanding that long breadth of exposition that is analogous to a JRPG is so firmly embedded in this game. If somebody were coming to me and somebody were saying, hey, as I have often said, right, I understand there's JRPGs and there's Western RPGs. This is what I like, and this is the type of gamer that I am, or the type of person of experience that I am, and which of these two types do you think I should like? I wouldn't recommend this game to a person who is looking for a Western RPG. This isn't the game that I would recommend to a person. If a person came to me and said, my favorite things are Skyrim, Oblivion, Mass Effect, things like that, I would not, this would not be the first game that I would tell them to go play. This game takes a very long period of time and very long breadths of sequence to kind of unwind the messaging it's trying to get across to you and the story it's trying to tell. It did not hit me the same way that a JRPG, it's not as existential as like a JRPG. Like sometimes like the exposition in JRPGs sometimes feels like it's babble, and sometimes that's a localization and translation problem. And so the story feels very grounded. But again, it feels very much like a very heavily lore, geographic and kind of geopolitical kind of driven kind of story, also wrapped in with like a tinge of mythology. So again, it feels kind of like a Game of Thrones thing, but it takes a big chunk of time doing that. And I might be
beeping here, so
I think I'm okay. There might be thunderstorms coming through, so we might have issues. But yeah, I mean, I was slogging through like the first hour, maybe hour and a half, but like the last fight that I just got done with, like I said, the nose on the airplane just tipped up like 20 degrees, and I'm pretty engaged. Again, that exposition is there, but one of the things that I have struck on that I liked right when I put the controller down was that a big thing for me is character progression in terms of who characters are. Not talking about skill trees, right, and branching, but like with every piece of entertainment I'm in, one of my pet peeves is I don't like stories about characters that end up exactly like they are what they started. Like Up in the Air is a great movie, but George Clooney's character literally is on an airplane at the end of that movie, the exact same person he was at the beginning. And he went through a journey and he learned some things, but the character we're presenting at the end is as if like that experience didn't happen. He's like the exact same person. He's like that type of thing I have a problem with. And so the thing that caught my interest is, right as I left off, is Senua's relationship and how she's feeling and thinking about her interactions with a character in the game has suddenly not 180'd, but suddenly shifted, right? And so there's an interest and there's a curiosity to see where this is going. They've introduced another character, so now there's like a 3-part dynamic. So that much is interesting. We'll see where it goes. It's in a 50-50 split where a game, is story versus mechanics. This game is very, very heavy story, and if that's not your thing, probably not going to work as well for you. It's probably not going to work well for me because I'm a person who's heavily driven by mechanics. I'm a person who's highly driven by fluidity of combat, speed, which is why I like racing games and flight simulators. But it's definitely a progression of art and a tilt in story making that is not the norm, and it's just a matter of whether or not you find that type of thing appealing to you.
Yeah, I think you answered my big question of like, is the narrative engaging enough? And given the kind of concerns or limitations in the combat, or in the gameplay aspects. Paul's Gaming Live over on the chat talks about it being fully motion captured, so it feels like you're playing a prescripted fight. I think that's as we're talking about the gameplay, that this is what Ninja Theory did. Like it's designed to be that way, and I could see where it can be engaging if it hooks you narratively, but you're not necessarily there for the gameplay aspect.
Yeah, I think I lost it. I was thinking about
how are you finding the voices and the kind of the internal dialogue that's happening with the character and her father and those pieces?
No, that's a good thing. So I kind of hate to admit some of this about myself. So look.
Oh, it's a safe space here. We're all friends. There's no judgment here. So tell us your pain, GameLogIQ.
So this is probably very cultural. It's also probably very race-based, like social norms. I have come up in a space that doesn't talk or interact a lot with issues of like mental health. Now that being said, I do have a spouse who works in that field, right? So that there's, I'm not 100% on the right, but there's elements of it that I don't want to say that I don't find necessarily interesting, but I've always felt like it's, and I hate to use this term, I've always felt like it's baggage in terms of like, it's always felt like it's made it difficult for me to glom onto that story. And so like a great, for instance, is Moon Knight. Mark Spector, Moon Knight, right during the arcs where the creative team like hyper focused on the mental health, made it very difficult for me to stick with and track like what I was supposed to care about in a Moon Knight story. Like they tried to do that within the bounds of like the Egyptian mythology, and I'm like, I kind of need you to do one or the other. Like it's a little too much. Like at a certain point, like I start to lose the thread on the narrative, and so this might be that. I suspect it would be that for a lot of people. I didn't. One of the reasons I didn't play the first game was because the first game, the marketing and PR around it was that's the entirety of what it was about, and so I was like, well, I don't know that would be like something that would be interesting to me to play. The thing that's weird for me this time, just coincidentally, is my current main on binge watching happens to be Doom Patrol. And so you have the character played by Guerrero? Is Diane Guerrero, who plays Jane, Crazy Jane. And that's one of the things that she has. She has a psychosis that is, multiple personality disorder. So it's interesting because as I'm watching that, I'm like, this must be what Jane is really going through, even though they use the kind of imagery and the metaphor and the allegory of her being in the underground. I'm like, that's what's happening when she's in the underground, essentially. And so it's relevant to another story that I happen to be absorbing at the time. And so it's not like a turnoff for me. There are times where sometimes I'm like, it's a little too much. And maybe it's supposed to be that. So yeah.
Great. Laura, thanks for sharing your personal connection to it. As you talk about, even having a personal connection still doesn't necessarily get you into the game. All right, GameLogic, thanks for the nice dive here on Hellblade 2. Let's turn the corner into our next gaming segment. One of the games that came out this week or in the last week or so has been Ubisoft's XDefiant. I know that Towmaster has played a little bit of it, but he's not here tonight, so we'll hear from him next week. But we've got a couple of news stories. First two news stories here are related to its launch and some of its both success and its struggles. So GameLogic, you want to take us through these first two?
Yeah, so this first story over on IGN by Wesley and Poole, Ubisoft working to fix XDefiant's busted hit generation. XDefiant launched its preseason this week, and Ubisoft's free-to-play first-person Call of Duty competitor appears to be going down well with competitive shooter fans hankering for an old-school experience. But there's one issue with the game that sticks out more than any other: hit registration. Hit registration, he's going to tell you what hit registration is, which you already know. Soon after XDefiant launched this week across PC via Ubisoft Connect, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. Important note there, that's the only place you can get it on PC. You cannot get it from Steam. You have to go through Ubisoft. Although why it's not, I think maybe this is because it's pre. I would think that it's supposed to show up. It should be showing up on Epic at some time. But at any rate, players took to social media subreddits and Discord to say the game was doing a poor job of hit registration, letting characters avoid fire more than they're used to in other similar games. I think the main thing that I would say is, number one, in the past lengthy history of the Call of Duty franchise, it's not like this has not happened to Call of Duty as well. This is also very analogous to the desync problem that we would talk about with regards to Halo Infinite. So regardless, it's any point glitch, whatever, particularly if people can take advantage of it and exploit it, of the game not doing what it's supposed to do. So I think the one kind of quirky pun that I caught in this was that on Twitter someone had posted a desire to start a petition, and the creative director of the game came back and said, you don't need a petition, we're already working on it and we think it's a high priority. So I talked to Slow Mo Backslap on the Damage Per Second, or DPS, podcast on Thursday. He likes the game. It has problems and nits, and he and I both talked about how they were things that would present a risk to this game, and kind of continuing to be a going concern. Things are good right now. There's a window right before the new Death Star that is the Battlefield development team, which is now the largest team assembled in all of creation ever. We'll have to pull that apart at some point on this show, because everybody seems to be doing that now, and it's going to blow up on people's faces, is what I've been saying. But there's a good window of opportunity here. It's super funny that, of course, what did Call of Duty do as this game dropped? And they were going to do it anyway because it's Memorial Day weekend, but they also did it to the XDefiant the last time when they dropped a beta. They immediately flipped the double XP switch. So I haven't played XDefiant. I have played a chunk of Call of Duty. So there we are. DBQ, I know this is straight up PvP, is not your particular bailiwick, I don't think, most of the time. Is this something you're going to be getting into at all?
I'll probably dabble in it just to see how going back to the fluidity, right? Because it's supposed to be relatively quick moving. I do plan to play it a little bit, but no, it's not something I usually stick with. I mean, even when I do PvP, it is, squad based is more of what I would do there. So maybe I might play around, or class based stuff. But I'm interested in it. I am curious to see if it finds traction. I think that's the real big one here, and I hope it does. Right? It's nice to have alternatives and options in a market where there's no longer a battlefield that really feels viable, and so having alternatives is not a bad thing.
And we've lost Medal of Honor and basically anything that was really giving. I mean, Apex Legends is probably the thing that gives, Call of Duty, the most run for the money right now. And there's one other, and I guess Fortnite. So yeah, it would be something. It would be great for something to have in the mix, and also something that is not a battle royale.
And the flip side of that is the success that it's been having in terms of, or at least in terms of garnering registered players, correct?
Yeah, so this story over on GameSpot by Cameron Koch. XDefiant's launch reportedly hit 1 million players in under 3 hours. XDefiant is off to the races, having reportedly already reached over 3 million unique players, with the first million coming 2.5 hours after launch. The above statistics are according to Insider Gaming, which reports some of the launch numbers surrounding Ubisoft's free-to-play answer to Call of Duty. According to Insider Gaming, the game is well on its way when it comes to surpassing Ubisoft's internal goals in terms of number of players. Those launch numbers make XDefiant the fastest Ubisoft game to ever reach 1 million players, and are even bigger than free-to-play competitor Apex Legends. Respawn's Battle Royale saw around 1 million unique players in its first 8 hours after launch back in 2019. Now, I'll also say the marketing and PR campaign for Apex Legends was highly contrived, where certain really big live streamers were contracted to play the game on its launch day. Now that was fair play in my opinion, because Apex Legends was a sneak attack, right? Nobody knew it was coming. It just launched, and then people were live streaming it, so fine. I haven't gotten, maybe I don't track the live streamers as much as I used to when I was in that community myself, so I haven't gotten the sense that there's that type of campaign going on for this. So this is largely grassroots and things that support that came up from the beta. The cautionary tale I would put here is Ubisoft's reporting, right? So there's no way to get these numbers because they're not on Steam. So the only way you can get them is from Ubisoft Connect. I don't suspect that Ubisoft is cooking the books, but what I will say is it seems like Square Enix is always the people who come out and say, yeah, like every game misses internal expectations. Ubisoft seems to be always the company that comes out and says every game has more traction than we expected it would. What is the I'm thinking Sea of Thieves, Skull and Bones.
Yeah, Skull and Bones. Yep.
All reports seem to indicate that player numbers are dropping off, but the PR piece that Ubisoft put out was that numbers were bigger than they expected, and they got a lot more return customers and stick-to-itiveness from the community, and therefore season 2, they're going to put a big push behind season 2, and they've made it free to play for a weekend or something so people can get into it. So it's very hard for me to tell what's really going on with Ubisoft reporting the numbers, which just gets us back to what I always say, which is don't overhype. Don't say that this new game as a service is going to make Ubisoft the publisher of the year, or the game's off to the races, or this is the Call of Duty killer. Give it 6 months. Let it get into at least its second season is my general thumb rule. Let us collect data. Let us really hear what's happening, and let us see whether or not this is going to continue to be a going concern before we start trying to make a PAL World or a Helldivers 2 out of this just yet.
I mean, I think the one thing we've talked about in the past, in the years past around Ubisoft, is for the most part they tend to stick with things, or at least drag things out longer than we would expect. Short of their Hyperscape battle royale game. Other than that, they have definitely they let things play out, or at least provide the chance to find an audience. So hopefully this is the case. That this engagement in terms of registered users. Again, we don't know how active those are. Is this somebody who logged on, created an account, played once, and shut it down? Right? We don't know that. We just know that it has got a lot of eyeballs on it, and hopefully that is something that gives it a chance to stick around longer than some of the flash in the pans like you're talking about.
And that's where you should, and where you could and you should have consumer confidence, right? It is highly likely that regardless, Ubisoft is going to stick with this game. Riders Republic has a community and still gets DLC. If that's happening, then it's highly likely that XDefiant is going to continue getting served, unless the costs of doing so are through the roof, which I guess is probably where Hyperscape was, where it was just the over-under and the margins on it just didn't benefit the math the same way that some of these other communities and and things that Ubisoft really supports and stays behind have. Obviously, the big hero story of Ubisoft's success is Rainbow Six Siege, which is still, one of the great, earning games as a service that's going on, that turned itself around and became one of the colossal giants of the market. So
Yeah, no, right. And For Honor, that lasted a whole lot longer than anybody would have anticipated. Yeah, I think given the way that XDefiant's development cycle has taken as long as it has, and has a number of kind of fits and starts to it, like if Ubisoft didn't have confidence in trying to play this out, they had plenty of opportunities to close it down, and they have not. So
that is the one kind of tattered ragged edge where you might be a little worried, is that this is Ubisoft San Francisco. They have nothing in their background or their pedigree that really speaks to this. Although I will say, I guess they had some experience in kind of games as a service ish, and big content title with Rocksmith. So whether or not that's prepared them to do a first person shooter game as a service, we'll have to see. But at least they have that notion of keeping a thing going and doing periodic content drops and serving a community. So hopefully that'll get them through.
All right, let's move on to our next story. This is my big story of the week, and this is Ziff Davis IGN Entertainment announced that it was acquiring the Gamer Network sites. So this is the game sites out of ReadPop. So ReadPop is the UK kind of venue that owns not only owns the packs, but then also whatever Eurogamer created in terms of its experience as an event. But the sites are what was sold or acquired by IGN. So this includes Eurogamer, Rock Paper Shotgun, one of our go-tos here, GameIndustry.biz, VG247. We also rely on a number of times. It also includes some of the console specifics like Xbox Hub, Push Square, Nintendo Life. So a variety of sites kind of all coming under the IGN, or at least being owned by IGN's parent company and IGN Entertainment. So not necessarily consolidating down. There really hasn't been a lot of announcement around what the plan is around this, other than the most notable news comes from people at these sites knowing or finding out that they've been laid off. Right? We have Brendan Sinclair, who we've referenced multiple times on this site as one of the managing editors over at GI.biz. Also Jeffrey Russo, Alice Bell over at Rock Paper Shotgun, and Stephanie Noonley Jackson at VG247. It sounds like there's probably some more that we haven't necessarily known or have come out yet. Also, some of the things like Rock Paper Shotgun is definitely kind of letting their emotions on their sleeve in terms of some of the things they're posting. They're just kind of filling some slots. This is such a, I feel, I wouldn't say it's such an odd, it makes sense on an acquisition piece, but without necessarily any kind of larger corporate strategy behind it. Like, it makes sense because ReadPop has been looking to kind of sell these sites for a while. That's been known for a year or two because they really just want to retain the event business. And so they've been looking for that. It also makes sense from an IGN as kind of a competitive advantage to purchase some of these. But again, these all hit in a variety of different places and ways. This also includes Digital Foundry, right? Because of it being part of Eurogamer. So I think I would have liked to see what the intent behind this is. What does this do? What does this mean? And I think in that void, you've had a lot of it's an easy story and a reasonable story for games journalists to talk about because it's hitting close to home. That we don't necessarily know what's the future of these sites in terms of how they're going to be used. We know having some long-standing people being released at the same time that the acquisition is being announced raises questions about what these are. If you are letting go a managing editor, editor in chief, you have some plan for some redundancies, or that you are trying to limit some of those, consolidate some of those pieces, I guess is, I think Warwana, I think that definitely some of the ad revenue pieces make sense in terms of if you're going to 60%, 80% of the game sites, the bigger game sites in terms of traffic, that Ziff Davis has got you covered, and we're going to get you your ads clicks one way or the other. So, potentially that is that. I also wonder, this is a whole different soapbox and a whole different discussion, but also feels like, given the changes that Google has made, both in terms of its search engine optimization and also its AI, kind of answering in initials before you get to the results pages, I wonder what that ad revenue already has been really tight and difficult for any number of internet-based sites. And so, hopefully, potentially scale helps there. But yeah, it feels like between IGN Entertainment and fandom, we've got most of the large gaming sites kind of covered. So, thoughts here, GameLogIQ?
Yeah, I think the cautionary tale that I've put out to people who, because we have a lot of new generations entering the gaming space and participating in the discussion who don't have some of the past history in their heads. When we went through this after the .com burst, and kind of in the approach path to the 2010s again, when GameSpy got absorbed and OneUp got absorbed, and EGM, right, who had its digital presence, got absorbed. The way things went is, for a certain period of time, those sites continued with their own writers, right, publishing to their own URL. And then they eventually became absorbed by the mothership, and they were just like, well, we're, I can't remember exactly who acquired who, but just let's say, for instance, well, we're all GameSpot employees now, but we're still going to write stories and publish them to oneup.com, right? But that was phase two. Phase three was, yeah, we're all bright GameSpot employees, and oneup.com doesn't exist anymore. So,
yeah, that was right. Like, IGN bought OneUp, everybody moved over, and yep. And then eventually, then you start whittling down because you don't need that many staff.
Right. So I would just kind of probably expect that that's the way it's going to go. And the problem that presents is the same consolidation problem that we talk about in the games industry, right? That we're going to have a relatively small number of big mothership kind of sites, all under the Ziff Davis banner. And, that will be where we are. And then you could draw your own, and I'm not saying you should assume that things will be bad, but I'm just saying, based on your own judgment, you can decide, how you're going to feel about that, about, basically like all gaming news all coming from one corporate source. Now, again, there's always the storyline that, corporate doesn't interfere with editorial and yada, yada, yada. But we also know, in a world of, web-based, SEO driven, ad driven business models, that doesn't, right, that threshold isn't, maybe what it used to be. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I think we just have to see is very reasonable here. I will amend my previous statement about not needing that many employees, not being able to support that many employees in terms of size, of scale. I think that the challenge, I mean, I guess I think it makes me long for those days where we had just a plethora of gaming sites that felt substantial, right? Like, and that is not the market, that is not the industry at this point in terms of games journalism. Those days have they reference directly back to your IGN 1UP days in terms of kind of, when there were a lot of voices and a variety of voices that were working at kind of larger conglomerate sites rather than a lot of voices that are a little harder to discover, right? Whether they're streaming voices, whether they're writing on Substack or other places, like where are you pulling some of the depth and variety of analysis? So be very curious to see from a games journalist, from a games as a critical analysis aspect, like where this all goes. And as somebody who longs for the days of good old GameIndustry.biz and GameSet Watch and Gamasutra in terms of places that are industry focused, hopefully, I would hazard a guess that the ad click traffic on GamesIndustry.biz is not nearly as high as what you're finding on Eurogamer or VG247. So, and what that means in terms of its future, we will have to see.
And Warawana hits the nail on the head. No, as of right now, there are no discussions or talks in progress about IGN acquiring E2KG. So this will continue to be the place that you can come to listen to, I feel like, relatively unbiased discussion of topics that are going on.
Nobody's paid me for it over, we're coming on our 10-year anniversary here pretty soon. So not quite. We got one more year, I think, in this before we hit our 10-year mark. So
we don't even monetize the YouTube channel. We don't even get paid for ads.
IGN did want to come for us, I guess. Like, we're not going to generate a whole lot for them, but no. All right. So let's move on to our final story here. Game Logic, why don't you take us home through the final one here with Larian?
Yeah, so this story over on Game Informer, Baldur's Gate 3 dev Larian opens new studio as development on two very ambitious RPGs continues. Larian Studios, the team behind last year's Baldur's Gate 3, has opened a new studio in Warsaw, Poland. Larian Studios Warsaw is the developer-publisher's seventh studio worldwide and joins others in Barcelona, Dublin, Ghent, Guildford, Kuala Lumpur, and Quebec. With two very this is the company announcement. With two very ambitious RPGs now starting development, what better way to see our visions realized than by growing our team and opening a seventh studio in the heart of Poland's lively gaming scene? The company's announcement post on X, formerly Twitter, reads. So a couple comments on this. We had this story, I think maybe a few weeks ago. I covered it on Talking About Games. I think we talked about it a little bit here about, I'm sorry, that was, at the time, that was the Nordic countries. So even further back, we mentioned that in Poland, there is now a game developers union that was started by CD Projekt Red. That union has extended its hands to say, you can join this union for any game developer in Poland working for any company. So theoretically, this will go down the path of, Larian will have the ability to join that union. So that'll be good, for those employees. Good for Larian in a time when, we're seeing consolidation and layoffs and yada, yada, yada. Good that, good news story. And my feeling is that Svenke is of the disciplined nature that he's not just taking the success of Baldur's Gate 3 and being short-sighted and saying we can afford to open up another studio and then has no plan for what happens, right, if things go south or whatever. Hopefully there's long-term growth potential for those people there. The one other thing I will say is, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently as well, not a bad idea to expand on the studio when you look at Larian and their pedigree and kind of what they've done over the Divinity series. One thing I will say is if you nail, because there's a quote in another interview, maybe it's in this one, where he talks about that their kind of expertise is in building RPGs, is that they build systems-based games. Number one thing we should recognize on this show is GameLogIQ loves him a systems-based game, right? And the one thing that occurred to me is, like, if you can nail building a system, then you could basically iterate within the framework of that system an infinite number of times. And
I think the Total War series would agree with you.
Yeah, or even because this is the example that occurred to me, Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like Gary Gygax, I don't know if he was the originator, but let's just use him as an example, came up with that rule set. And it's funny to me because of the discussion. I go back to Hellblade 2, where there's, like I said, been a lot of sturm and angst about, well, you're saying it didn't do anything more than the first game. And that's a large part of the dialogue and discourse that's going on now. And I'm like, okay, people can choose to get offended to it now, but when it was, Spider-Man, God of War, even Skyrim, Oblivion, like, look, like the Division. Look, when I love a game, if the developer gives me that same game again with an iteration, I'm okay with that. right? All of this.
The guy who loves playing Hades 2, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. Iteration is not necessarily bad.
Right. What I want you to change is I want you to change the things that you did not do well the next time. I don't need you to arbitrarily progress or do something different just for the sake of hitting a review cadence, right? Drum beat that says you got to do something different. No, I do want you to look at the negative feedback you got about the game and fix that. But if you just perfect your formula, we have lots of peak games that have come out. Forza Horizon 5, right? Nothing really new, just maybe arguably like the perfection of that formula. And that's fine. So in terms of growth, again, if you've got a system, and Larian definitely has been iterating on that, there shouldn't be any problem with expanding on a team, because you can take that system and you can do an RPG set in medieval times. You can do an RPG science fiction. You can do a Western. You can do, spies, right? And all of this maps back to, again, the example that I gave, because that's exactly what TSR did when it had the D&D license, right, before Wizards of the Coast. What did they do? They had D&D that worked fine for a couple decades. Then they took that same basic framework and they did Star Frontiers, and they did Boot Hill, and they did Top Secret. And that's really all you have to do, because people loved going off and just playing those RPGs in different settings, notionally, basically within the same framework. Even though those rule sets were a little different, they did different number scales, but the underpinnings of it were basically, still roughly the same.
Yeah, I would think, you don't, in the state, I'm thinking of Wara's comment here about overextension. Given the state of the industry and what's been going on, I would hope that you're not making this decision to expand lightly, right? That, like you said, that they have a plan, they know, they have a sense of what they're trying to do, because as we've seen almost every other week, that places that have overextended or that over consumed other studios, that is not sustainable in this current marketplace, or at least within this current marketplace, with the type of profit margins that the corporations are looking for. So, well, let's move around and take our final slot here with our regular rundown and our round robin. We've got a number of games that are some good ones to talk about. GameLogIQ teased a little bit that you're ready. You haven't been playing some XDefiant, but you've still been playing some Modern Warfare. I've got a game to talk about that Wara and Hero Down Under talked a little bit about in the chat without even knowing that it was going to come up a little later in the show. So why don't you start off first with Modern Warfare 3?
They may have known it was going to come up later in the show because I post the agenda in the show notes.
Well, there we go. Well, good for them for reading ahead. How about that?
So I have been obviously playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. I was about to say Black Ops 6, but that's not here yet. The only thing I really want to report about this game is, I did, continue the grind through the season. I fell off a couple of times, in pursuit of other things, or just got kind of burnt out. But I did wind up sticking with it through. It helped that they kicked double XP in a few days early as we were on the approach path to Memorial Day weekend. I did wind up 100%ing the Battle Pass. The Battle Pass now is kind of quirky in that you 100% it. That's what it reads in the upper right-hand corner, but there will still be challenges left. So there are, because of like the whole Black Cell thing and maybe some other parts, like I said, I 100%ed the battle pass, but there were still 2 things left that were based entirely on challenge. They weren't just based on earning XP. So I had to I was like, well, I have 100% of the map. I may as well just go after these other 2 things. They were like, you had to get kills in like tack stance, and then with assault rifles, and then I think you had to do like another iteration of that to get like the final weapon on the map. After completing those, I did. People aren't going to like it, but I did. I was like, well, I've already completed 100% now. I may as well just go ahead and get the black cell, battle pass, kicker as well, since as soon as I pay for that, I've unlocked all the other stuff that goes along with it. So I did that. And so yeah, I had a pretty good time. If I do go that path, I'll do it the same way for season 4. Like I won't get the black cell thing unless I've actually already done the work and I know that I've put in the repetitions to get through all that. So it is what it is. Season 4 looks like it's got good stuff coming. Black Ops 6 looks like it's got good stuff coming. So as far as I can tell, until seams really kind of start opening up on this thing, whenever Xbox gets around to how in the world they're going to get the thing to the cloud and on the Nintendo Switch, I anticipate we'll start maybe hitting some rough patches there, but for Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 6, I think we'll be okay. So I will probably continue sticking with it in my repertoire.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see what Black Ops 6 ends up looking like, which is usually when I dip back into Call of Duty. The last one I've spent a lot of time with was Cold War. So, all right. So my game that I played and realized, just like last year with Cocoon, I am not very smart when it comes to puzzle games, as Hero Down Under was talking about in the chat in terms of puzzle challenges. So I played some Animal Well. I played it on and off over the past couple weeks. I really appreciate what it is, but I also know that it's not for me. That it is a pixel game, kind of puzzle Metroidvania like, not necessarily a lot of combat, more of kind of puzzles, but you're making your way through in a Metroid, much more Metroid than Vania, I would say, in terms of, because there's not a lot of combat. You've got some enemies that can hurt you. You are usually avoiding combat. You've got a few things to interact with that you can carry an item at a time, which can do some damage. Otherwise, it is also used in some of the puzzles. I freaked out a little bit the first time I found the ghost dog that chased me around, which is part of one of the final challenges of the game. But it is also incredibly non-linear in terms of its challenges. You are a little blob moving around a 2D plane in a kind of Metroid-like fashion. You got 100% war. Well, wow. I am officially not very smart. Congratulations, sir. I'm glad you enjoy the puzzles. I appreciate what the puzzles are trying to do, and I can see. And my challenge is that when I don't necessarily have a lot of time to dive into a game and stay in that headspace, a really challenging puzzle game like this, like Tunic the other year, it is difficult to stay in that space and to keep coming back to it when there's not a lot of time in my gaming life. Like I can sit down and play an hour of a game of football or basketball, and that's fine, but it's also a muscle memory aspect to it, just like if you're playing in Destiny or a multiplayer match. But diving into Animal Well is challenging for me. But every time, but the thing, I guess it's a testament to its design that I have kept coming back, even though I can acknowledge that it's not a game for me. It is, the artwork, the pixel art is beautiful. There's even some depth in the 2D animations. Like I love that you're brushing up against vines and they're moving. The music is haunting and so fitting and really wonderful to listen to. Like this just drips with quality and artisanship. But it's also like, I can appreciate that as a piece of art. I also can understand that it is maybe not my personal preference. And so that's Animal Well. I've been playing it on PlayStation through the PlayStation Premium package that it's there and available with. Next up for you, GameLogIQ. Unless you have questions on Animal Well, I'm assuming this is not your type of game in your wheelhouse of a puzzle platformer, lo-fi 2D.
Not necessarily.
Yep.
But I mean, there's always possibilities. Hey, I was playing Hi-Fi Rush earlier this week, so you never know.
That's a little different. I mean, you got some beat going there. So,
but I just mean it's just representative of something that's not in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, fair enough. Yes, I do not mean to peg you as one type of gamer, because we all the wonderful thing about this discussion between the three of us is that we all cross boundaries in terms of our genres so very often that it provides a nice scope. So, as I was just talking about playing basketball or football for an hour at a time, but you've been playing some football as well with Football Club 24.
Yeah, so let me first of all say, because it occurred to me while I was playing this game, I've had a lot of deep thoughts about a lot of things this past week. Look, Andrew Wilson, Neil Druckmann, lots of people are talking about AI. I was about to say EA, AI. And AI's, sure, whatever. Like, if you want to make a practical application of AI, but one of the tirades I went on this week is because I watched the Sony strategic meeting 2024, and they were also talking about AI. And again, like I've explained to you, I'm working on a current AI project, and I know what my project's going to do, and it's a big optimization problem. And so the hope is that the theory is that the machine is going to do a better job of optimizing, right, by processing the data that's available than a human being will. But we've always had computer programs for optimization. So my point is that the tech industry is doing a horrific job right now today of translating to the average everyday man what practical value AI provides to them. It's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors. Like, and I'm like, just stop. Like, come up with some like real use cases. And as I was playing EA FC 24 this week, I was like, look, you guys go off and you record thousands of lines of scripted like audio and voiceover, and you misapply them like 22% of the time, right? You come up with some wackadoodle statement from an announcer that makes no sense to like, or you get like a super repetitive statement. So I'm like, look, if you want to use AI and you want to use machine learning, like figure out like when those things are supposed to be applied, and make, utilize AI to make emergent voiceover, right? To actually have it evolve during the game, so it's not the same canned scripted things that we listen to, right, for 100 games. That would be one thing you guys could work on. But at any rate, I continued my season with EAFC 24, which I haven't done a lot of. I have a lot more soccer that I should be playing. But I continued playing with mine. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this because I'm playing in the Danish Superliga, and I'm playing FC Midtjylland. And so I had a match against our arch rivals Brøndby. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correct either, but it was a super interesting match because I hadn't played in forever. And so I quickly went down. I think quickly went down like 3-0. And I don't even think I scored goals until I maybe scored one goal in the first half. But in the second half, we rallied and came back with another 3 goals to win the game 4-3. Again, like, look, I'm not European. I'm American. I'm a Westerner. Like, I am a diehard, dyed in the wool Westerner. There's vast amounts of soccer that I don't get, but ever since I've been playing, FIFA and now FC, like, I get it. I'm sure, my family was like, what's going on down there? Because like every time I scored a goal as I was coming back, I was like super excited, yelling and screaming. So it's just a great experience, and EA continues to do a good job of it. I saw, I guess 2K, I think, has locked down the FIFA license, which
really?
I believe so. Yeah. I believe I saw that, like, which totally makes sense to me. Is like, I was like, what? I don't understand why somebody didn't snap that up. Who needs to make a run at EA? So look, we've got college football coming out. The FC franchise is doing great. EA's, doing things they need to do to appeal to the demographic they need to appeal to, and I'm having a great time with EAFC 24.
I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I was never a big soccer fan, but playing it in video game form, like I have enjoyed watching World Cups now and then because I start to understand it through the video game. So yeah, it will be good. I'm glad you're enjoying it. But like a good athletic event, a good sports game, that competition is something that engages you no matter what the sport is, right? Like whether you're pulling ahead at that last curve and the last turn, whether you came back and won a goal, whether your team in Call of Duty came back, right? Like there is the aspect of competition is inherently engaging and exciting.
Yeah, and I'll echo something that Hero Dad mentions. He's saying he only plays career mode, and that's the same way I am. Like, look, I understand people's complaints about like ultimate mode and all that kind of stuff, and but I'm like, it's not in my face. Again, I have the same complaint about FC, that I'll voice now, that I voiced when I first got the game. Long layoff. I'm coming back to the game. Same problem. I'm like, when the heck are all these modes? Like the way these modes are titled make no sense in what terms they actually are. So there was a little bit of that. I had to go through and like dig through and figure out what the modes were again. But once I had that, I mean, I couldn't even find like where my own career season was saved, because it's not called career. It's called manager mode. So it leads you to believe like, oh, this is just where you go and play from like the manager's room. You don't actually play the teams on the field, but it is the standard old, career mode / franchise mode. So,
well, that answers my question of how you ended up in the Danish league. So I wondered why you chose that franchise to manage, but you were put there as the career mode. So I get it now.
Yeah, well, I always go into these games and pretty much randomize where I'm gonna play, so I don't have any thing. Although when I have played Madden, I randomize typically amongst states that I have actually lived in, where I wouldn't mind living there again. So yeah.
No, I love a good sports career mode, right? Like we've talked about in the last few months. I've talked about Road to the Show in MLB. I've just been, fired up a WNBA career mode in 2K24. So trying out, there's that aspect of that narrative and that story goes back and that can hook you. So
yeah, and just one other thing to stick my toe in the door. Good catch by Hero Down Under mentions that 2K is rumored to have bought the FIFA license, not confirmed.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, but it would be a logical spot, right? Like if there's another sports developer, there is only mainly one other sports developer. So yeah, it's a very logical spot for them to try to do something with. So we will see. All right, my final game here, as I had mentioned at the top of the show, I've been out sick. So that allowed me to do some things that I had not necessarily put the time in to do. Sat in one space long enough to get BattleNet and Epic and Ubisoft Plus or Ubisoft Connect all running on my Steam Deck. So I was able to play some Diablo 4 on my Steam Deck along with playing some Diablo 4 on Xbox. This comes hot off the heels of the Loot Reborn patch from last week. I will say I'm not far enough in to actually tell you how great the new crafting and trads everything else is within the end game of the Loot Reborn. The early game, I don't know that it feels a little bit different in terms of some of the loot drops. I definitely feel like I am not overwhelmed and sifting through nearly as much, but what I'm getting is often more meaningful, which is exactly one of the things that they discussed that they were going to do. From everything I'm reading about the endgame stuff, it sounds people who are well into the kind of loot grind, loot game of a variety of games, whether that's Borderlands, Destiny, or any other kind of loot-based game, above and beyond Diablo, that people feel pretty satisfied with what it is, even though there are some stories out there in terms of some of the challenges within the game economy right now around gold and the amount of the billions of gold that it takes for some of the high end end game masterworking, things like that. But in terms of the game itself, it's a perfect sick game, right? You just kind of stare at the screen, push a few buttons, you run toward things. You don't necessarily, you run toward the icon. Yeah, there's some demon, something, but you're just there to slash some things, get some good loot, and keep on going. So, been playing it on both console and on Steam Deck. Runs great on Battle.net on Steam Deck. That was a real nice kind of bonus there in terms of having it. Since I already had it on PC, I didn't necessarily want it to buy it again on Steam. So getting it up and running on Battle.net wasn't too hard. So that was beneficial. It also caused me to download. It caused me to download Diablo Immortal on my phone again for the first time in 2 years. But this week they just had a new patch and a brand new class, a Tempest class, kind of a water based with like water whips and water powers. It's been a while since I played some Diablo Immortal. I'm not going to dive back into it's been even longer since I've spent any money on Diablo Immortal and never spent anything more than the first battle pass. So, but again, that loot grind is well polished and well rounded in both those games. But yeah, Diablo 4, easy to fall into. Also, it's been relatively easy to set on a shelf because there's not necessarily the same kind of investment. But definitely glad that it was there when I had no other mental capacity other than feeling like I should be doing something, and playing some Diablo was the perfect remedy for my illness. So
to get Battle.net working, was that like a workaround you had to go figure out how to do that somebody posted instructions for, or is there some like native SteamOS client that you can download?
So there's not. I mean, initially when I tried it back in the winter, it was much a bigger of a workaround in terms of a side load. But now with Lutis, Lutis, which is if you're launching from the Steam desktop mode, it's one of the apps that's in there. And then from that, once it installs, you have the ability to run or to install EA, Ubisoft, Battle.net, Epic, and kind of run through that. So it becomes like you can put Lutis on your Steam Deck menu rather than having to run everything in desktop. So you can launch it from your standard OS in the Steam Deck. And then from there, now it populates up with a window, and I can launch any of the other platforms, and it runs kind of natively through there. So it is much more streamlined than it was initially with that up and running, and it made the path of grabbing and having all those kind of up and running on the Steam Deck pretty straightforward. All right. Anything else as we round the corner for the week, GameLogIQ?
Nothing major. I just, other things that I've dipped into during the week. Far Cry 5, a game on Steam called Truck Driver, which is like a very lightweight American truck simulator alternative. And then hitting up some Tekken, and I've also hit up some Tekken 8 on the PlayStation 5.
Nice. So, and as we look to the week ahead, it looks like you're going to spend some more time with Hellblade, and that narrative has got you to keep on going with.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I mean, I'm sticking with. I mean, this is definitely a game I'm playing out of obligation, right? From like us being podcasters and content creators. I do think this is a artistically significant game, to partake in, because it will say something. It's trying to say something to the industry, and whether or not it is saying anything that's loud enough or significant enough for people to hear and for us to pay attention to is something that I want to check out. But yeah, I will. But I will also say again, because I mentioned that character progression arc that I saw as I was kind of walking away from it, that has enough of my interest to cause me to continue to peek back in.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be very interested to hear more about it next week, to see kind of where it's at, if things have changed, if the narrative has evolved, if the combat has modified any. So yeah, that's great that you're sticking with it. My big game for the week is on the 28th. We have the relaunch of Multiverses. So the platform battler, I had dove into that back last August when it came out in early access. Not last August of 22 at this point, right? Because it came out in August of 22 in early access. Okay, it was in early access for maybe 6 months and then was pulled down, and is coming back this coming week. So we've got that is the Warner Brothers based platform brawler in the Smash Brothers like aspect. So be curious to see if things that had unlocked before are still there, if there's any perks for being an early access person the last time, but also now that it's been rebuilt in UE5 and running on some new netcode, how it feels and how it plays. So looking forward to playing a little bit more, at least in seeing how that plays comparatively. So, and we it should sounds like maybe all three of us might be back for the first time this month, next week. Well, next week would be next month at this point. So we are heading into the end of May, rounding the corner and turning into June. So, which means also that as we head into June, we'll have plenty of news to talk about as we get in the second, third, fourth week of June, as we get lots of gaming shows and announcements and things like that. So we are coming into game announcement season, which will give us plenty more to talk about. But as always on E2KG, we always find plenty to talk about, and hopefully what we're talking about is engaging to you. So for everybody here that's been joining us in the chat, Hero Down Under, Wara Wara, Paul's Gaming Live, Nate, thanks everybody for being here in the conversations back and forth. GameLogic, thanks for running the wheels and for keeping the discussion flowing tonight. For myself, Dbqhams and GameLogic, this has been episode 339 of Enough to Keep Going. We will see you next week, but until then, play the games you love those you play with. Be kind to yourself out there. Good night, everybody.